You're the best.
Awesome. Good morning. It is Thursday, May 1st. It's gonna be May.
Oh, good God.
And we are currently talking about S-127, the Senate Housing Bill, but specifically the CHIP language that was sent over to us from Commerce. And the first witness we have is Maura Collins, who has been in this committee quite often, and I don't think we need to introduce ourselves, but Maura, for the record, that would be great.
For the record, I'm Maura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Thanks for having me in. I know you've been taking a lot of CHIP testimony, so I'm going to just hone in on a couple of the discussion points that I think you were focused on yesterday and some of the key decisions it sounds like this committee's grappling with. To start off, I do have to start with the basics though of just how necessary and needed infrastructure support is in our state. That the cost of infrastructure, I think I've testified before about how it used to be shared and socialized across an entire community. And so you'd have hundreds, if not thousands of Vermonters paying for infrastructure. And now it has shifted and infrastructure is borne by the residents of that development. So that might be anywhere from 6 to 50, I'm going to say 100 people, but still 100 people compared to 1,000 people. It gets really expensive. And that is one of the many escalations of what's driving up housing costs. And I
You have a question?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. No, well, it's just.
However, if a like in tip, if the cost of the infrastructure is spread out across a town, just for some housing units, how long does it take a town to really benefit from an investment made on behalf of only some residents?
All infrastructure investment is only enjoyed by some residents. You know, if I don't drive down the roads in your community, I'm not benefiting from it. And so I do think that infrastructure investment for a subdivision or portable or any kind of multifamily building or something like that, you could say that that is only benefited by the 20 residents of that apartment building. I would say that if some of those people were running my daycare and I could show up to work today and be here, that would be benefiting me, even if I didn't live in that housing. And if my firefighter had easier access to a road or something to go save some lives, that benefits me if my loved one is there. So the amount of time that a town would take to recoup, we'd have to look at a case study and make some assumptions and look into the future. We'd only know it after the fact. And so I don't think I can answer it in a quantifiable way, but in a broader way, I believe that infrastructure investment serves Vermont because we are supporting Vermonters.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying, why have it focused on a group of houses versus a town?
A town is a group of houses and I'm a statewide agency though. So I'm looking at like helping your community. Why should Fairfax care?
I can say that in partial answer. It used to be in the old days that infrastructure was paid for by the town. And that means the town's taxpayers a long time ago. But as towns became more short of funds, they asked the development to pay for more and more. And it's not atypical for a development, for example, to be required to put in sidewalks. On the theory that the people who mostly use the sidewalks are the people in that town, in that development. But the reality, of course, is everybody walks on the sidewalks. And you can even have an assessment district which assesses the property owners for the sidewalks, even though other people walk on it. And the real problem, in my view, is we're balkanizing ourselves. We're cutting things up into little pieces, insisting that only this part should be paid for by these people, when in fact, pretty much everybody benefits from everything. But these days, there's this, people are resorting to financing devices that do, I mean, I think you're onto a real problem, but it's just the way it is.
And our history lesson that we had just said about municipalities used to bear the cost actually starts the story mid-chapter as well, because the federal government used to actually provide a lot of these costs as well to education and other public goods and no longer does. So it went from federal to state to municipality. Now we're down to a housing development, and we're wondering why housing got so expensive when it used to be socialized over a far greater number of people. I know I only have 15 minutes left because I am doing another committee at 9:30,
That's
so
fine. Okay.
I don't want to cut off questions, but so very much in support of the CHIP proposal and the infrastructure support. I understand the realities in this building that some don't see this as a way to grow and expand our grand list and bring in more Vermonters and more tax base and all that. And instead they take the framework of wanting to put guardrails, is the word I hear, on this program. And I can appreciate that. And should those folks want to keep guardrails on it, I think there have been a lot of conversations about should that happen based on geography, like what tier you're in, should it be based on where you are in the permit process, if you have a permit or not. I know that affordable housing is one of the limiting factors, guardrails, as well as primary residence. So I'm going to focus on those two guardrails if we are working under the assumption that this needs to be limited. And if I had more than 15 minutes, maybe we could have challenged that assumption as well and gone into that. So one of the ideas is let's use the priority housing project definition, which is actually not affordable housing. It's mixed income housing. It's just saying that 20% of the housing pretty much is affordable. So that sounds very accessible. Any developer could do 20%. The rest of that definition is, and it has to remain affordable for 15 or 20 years. I don't have the definition for me. And that starts to get a little less accessible to developers. I did spend my before bedtime last night listening to your committee's testimony. And Representative Bartley, you were asking about would a developer put in affordable housing without a requirement? And I'm not going to speak for all developers, so maybe yes, no, but right now I think the market is no, because it doesn't pencil, and so they can't do affordable housing. And it's that longevity of the affordability is why I feel comfortable in saying probably not, because they may initially have some inexpensive rents, but then keeping them low for 15 years comes at a cost. It will impact the assessment and value of the building, as you heard from Evernorth yesterday. And I think that's the hard part.
Can I ask you a question? And understanding that this is probably an opinion-based question. If the answer is no, do you think we see more developers kind of putting their hands up saying, you know what, I'm not going to start developing this if there is that affordable requirement? Do you see more developers saying, no, you know what, it's just not worth it, I can't make it work? Or do you see more developers saying, yep, it's a requirement, I'm gonna have to do it? What do you see?
I see that people will move forward when they see a path forward. So if the numbers work for them to have inexpensive housing, they're going to do that. Josh Hanford said that yesterday, and I agree with him. Macroeconomics, we know that the cheaper you can offer your product, the bigger your customer base is. So if they could do it on their own, they would. If I could offer apartments for $1,000, I'd have a ton of customers. You know, I could have cherry pick the best tenants. They wouldn't have a lot of needs. Maybe, you know, there's nothing stopping me. I can't offer apartments for $1,000. So they would do it if they see a path forward, meaning if they're told they have to because of inclusionary zoning or somehow the municipality is requiring it. If they have to do it because the Home Act required some amount of density or something like that, it's going to be more affordable. If they can get their hands on some subsidy, they're going to do it. So I do think that there are paths forward for it to happen if they have access to those tools. So with the priority housing project. This was a way of bypassing Act 250. I'm not the Natural Resources Board. I don't have the list of all the PHPs, but I remembered last night I had an email where it got emailed to me a couple years ago, and I found it. So I am going to cherry pick data, which I hate doing, but it's the only year I had the list of PHPs for 2021. And that's what I got emailed one day. And I'm a hoarder. So in 2021, the NRB had approved 10 projects for a priority housing project. I took out the pit in downtown Burlington because it never went forward as it was approved. So there was one more and I did take that out. But of the projects that did go to completion, there are 8 of them. 7 of them got government money. So I think we have to be realistic that if you're going to require affordability to hit below market rents, even for 20% of the units, and require it stays that way for at least 15 years, you're talking about tax credit housing, VHCB funded housing, affordable housing that you see from nonprofits and others. So let's be honest. So I get that we want guardrails, but we need, you've heard my testimony before, 7,500 homes every year for the next 4 years, starting this year, and it's now May. 7,500 homes this year, let's just say. And pre-pandemic, before the largesse of federal money, historically, we've done 250 to 300 affordable, government subsidized affordable homes a year. So let's hope that now that the largesse is over and we don't have as much one-time funding for VHCB and ARPA money's gone and all that, let's go back to 2018, 2019 and all that, where we're doing 300 homes a year, which I think the last time I was in this room, we showed that we're not going to because HUD is disappearing before our eyes and there won't be as much public money for affordable housing. So I think 300 is really optimistic. It could be 100, 150 units, but I'm going to say 300 to say best case scenario. We need 7,500 homes. We're going to let 300 of them access this vehicle. I think we went from a guardrail to something way too constricted. So there were a lot of conversations about how to administer this and monitor it and all that. If it has government money, don't worry about it. VHFA is doing it already for the tax credits. VHCB does an excellent job. DHCD, we've got it covered if you're talking about the government subsidized affordable housing. What I think you were talking about was who's monitoring it if it doesn't have that. And that does get more complicated because someone needs to double check. And right now, it's assuming that in the development agreement, the municipality is going to ensure that this remains affordable during the tax benefit. I really did listen to all the testimony. I really supported the league's testimony on this. I struggle to see how this isn't an unfunded mandate to our towns. Now, let's give it to state government. I mean, let's have an appropriation for a staff person or two to monitor this. If not, you can push it to the municipalities, but the rural caucus and towns are clear that they are already underwater and they can't take this on. During the pandemic, we had a $50 million mortgage assistance program. We would pay people's past due mortgages, property taxes, HOA fees, and utility bills. I remember there was a town that I will not name where a property was going to tax sale. It was approved for this federal funded program. We called up this town and said, we would like to write you a check for the entire amount of taxes that you are owed. Tell us how much it is. All we need is for you to send us ACH instructions so we know where to wire the money. That town said, it was a part-time town clerk who said, I'm retiring in September. This was June. She said, I'm not taking on any new programs. I'm not participating in your program. I said, I just want to send you a couple tens of thousands of dollars. You don't have to participate in my program. The applicant applied, we approved them. You don't have to do anything. You just have to tell me where I send the money. We're not taking on any new programs. I don't understand this. I'm not doing it. I'm retiring in September. I only work 10 hours a week. Not doing it. I then asked, what do I tell the reporter? What do I tell your state senator who may have been high profile chair of Senate Appropriations? Like, what do I tell these people when they find out that this constituent is gonna be evicted from their home? And then finally we got to like, well, you can talk to this other guy who works for the town and maybe he'll participate. And he was more than happy to send me their bank account information, and we sent the money and it all ended well. I'm using it as an example of how, when they say they're under-resourced, they can't even take the time to realize I'm trying to send them $20,000 that they're owed to save someone from being evicted. So I do think that like the homeownership, if it has to be affordable long-term, and we're talking about homeownership, there's no way to do that without a covenant, a deed restriction, something underlying the land. It's going to show up in title. And so let's be honest that we're talking about supporting great affordable housing like shared equity and transactions that have these covenants, but that is unusual for a lot of homeownership. And so it may not be broadly.
Moira, let me ask you a question. I understand your testimony. What you're saying is if a developer is required to do inclusionary, low and moderate income, and they can access the financial resources to do it, they'll do it.
Yeah.
What you're saying is, if they can't access those resources because there's not enough, then it just means they'd have to pay for it out of the project, and that's very difficult.
Mhm.
And
It won't move forward. I mean, that's where it won't pencil and we won't have the house.
equal pencil. Okay. Another issue is, well, how do you administer longevity? And how does that work with your programs, middle income programs, et cetera? I remember I'm not really that familiar with the details, but listening to the developer, remember we had a
Yeah,
developer,
yeah.
you brought him in?
Yeah.
The rents are reduced.
Mhm.
How is that administered?
Through VHFA, we have a compliance team that is going, and frankly, we get admin fees that we're keeping to pay for the staff who's then checking at each move-in to make sure that the tenants are eligible. That's what I'm saying is like, you have appropriated to run a program. So for this, if you want that longevity, you just have to appropriate to run a program.
So we just have to give some money to VHFA and say, you run it, right?
VHFA is not going to run it because if I had more time, I would tell you the questions. Like, I don't know, what do you mean by income, by the way? Because there's different ways of defining that and what's included or not. Is it that the rents have to be affordable at that level? And I don't care if a rich person lives there, or do I have to check the incomes of people who live there? And the homeownership, same kinds of questions. I have a ton of questions I would ask if we were asked to administer it. And I would need admin fees to pay for this. I mean,
Right.
like I said, right now with tax credits and all that, there is fee income that tax credit developments are paying. A little part of that rent that people are paying when they're living in affordable rent, a couple bucks of it is coming to VHFA so that we can do the compliance and oversight and make sure that this is high quality housing with the right people living in it, following all the IRS rules and the state overlays and things like that.
Okay, got it. Go ahead.
I know you don't have a lot of time, so I have two questions. That 20%
Mhm.
for low income, do the people that are not the 80%, is it fair market that they're getting, their rents are? Or is it increased for those people to cover the 20%?
So because the majority, it seems like the majority of priority housing projects are government subsidized, and it's a lot, they're not just doing 20% of affordable. it's much more of the building is for, like 90% of the building is
Oh,
affordable.
okay.
Because it has tax credits and VHCB money to make it affordable. So in your idea of that a market rate developer is just gonna set aside 20%, I've heard some developers say that, yes, they have to jack up the rents on the market rate and they become luxury apartments to afford the subsidized. But I also know that, like I said, if PHPs with this requirement are not just doing mixed income, they're actually doing wholly affordable housing buildings, and it's not mixed income. Like the 20% is a minimum, but not a standard.
My other question is, you said you support VLCT. Their issue appeared to be the primary resident.
Yep, and so what they were saying was that can happen. First off, I'm all for this being for primary residences and full stop. That is, I believe that. And I think that can be administered at the initial outset. So that first home buyer or that first set of renters and what the developer is intending to do at the beginning should all be primary residents. It's 15 years later. I don't think anyone appreciates the level of oversight that would have to happen in order to guarantee that. And if you put that risk of noncompliance on the municipality, there is a risk there. VHFA's loan programs, our mortgage programs, have to be primary residences. You have to live in the home if we're giving you a mortgage. Every year, we find someone who is in Florida.
You wanted to go back over the language there. What is the language that you used or would use to describe the first? In other words, first you have the developer, right?
Yep.
You'll have an agreement between the town and the developer. That's number one. And then the developer is going to have a first generation of home buyers. There must be a better word than first generation. How do you describe that?
So I appreciate you clearly have more development agreement experience than I do. So pardon me, I wished I had a chance to catch you before I sat down here to ask a question, because in my experience, development agreements are just that. They're about the development. So I'm going to deliver housing that meets the zoning and affordability and all that. I'm not used to them covering the operations of the housing.
They do.
And so
Well, they can. But I'm wondering about if we were to follow your idea of just the first generation, there must be a better word.
Yeah, so page 6 of the bill that came over from Commerce, that section 4 is what VLCT was testifying on. And it says, provide terms to ensure that any housing unit within the housing development be offered exclusively as a primary residence. Period. Right now, it says, until all indebtedness for the infrastructure project, I would just cut that time period there.
Well, any questions before she's 30 seconds over?
No, I do have one. I can't sit in this chair and say that the guardrail got too narrow without taking a minute to say, but if you want to support affordable housing, which also should happen, have I got a report for you? Because you asked us to do a summer study committee last year to look at priority housing projects. And now the Act 250 exemptions are available to everyone. What are we going to do to incentivize the creation of affordable housing? That is a critical question that the legislature needs to be grappling with. I just don't know if this tool is the right one, but there were a dozen recommendations from that report, and it says new funding, encouraging municipal action for affordable homes. Hold on, I'm in the wrong section of my notes. There were a whole bunch of fund affordable housing within Tier 1A, remove the unit cap on Tier 1B, make Tier 1B as opt-out, not opt-in, subsidize affordable housing, funding for VHCB, funding for programs that this committee has supported. It goes on from there. So
Isn't this the document that came out that was provided to us right at the beginning of the session?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So if you want to support affordable housing, we got ideas and let's get to work.
Yeah.
I'm just nervous that the CHIP proposal, we need this tool to create the housing we need because we need the housing so desperate.
Okay, Joe?
correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this language, changing the language to open it up or to create, so it'd just be that first sale or that first rental. I don't think it would create a situation where a town couldn't, in their contractual agreement with the builder, set it at the whole length of the town. Or
How
forever.
would be free to, yes, this is just a minimum requirement.
Yeah,
The town.
so it's not like you couldn't.
Yeah, I think.
And they can do short-term rental regulations for their town if they're worried
That's
about it.
Another thing is,
Yeah.
what about putting in as an alternative or by ordinance? You know, they were worried about making it part of the contract. Actually, my experience is contract is more flexible and easier than ordinance, but putting in or by ordinance.
Yes, and I think doing town by town short-term rental regulations is the right way to do it. And I think if we can have incentives for towns to look at short-term rentals and have some kind of protections on that, I would love an incentive for towns to do something. But every town that impacts short-term rentals is going to be different. So I think that the strength of that, I think Woodstock's going to need more than
So
another.
the idea is appealing, but it has to be flexible.
Mhm.
Right.
But again, I think there are other bills that can support housing policy in the state besides this CHIP proposal.
Right.
So I just want to keep saying like maybe somewhere else in S1.7 or something, we can be doing
I
something.
think part of our problem was a lot of what we appropriated, as you know, didn't make it.
I know.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
As
Thank you.
always.
Sorry to run.
Okay. Miro, members of the committee, hello, good morning. I'm sorry I wasn't here right. at the beginning. Thank you very
Yeah, no
much.
problem.
Just a couple of things before we move on to our next witness. Hi, Miro. Excuse me a minute while I sort of talk to the committee. Okay, so here's where we are. We have the 23-page stuff that came in. And we have that. We own it. It's ours, okay? We are free as a result, just procedurally, to mess with it, to use a term of art. And we can, make changes if we want to. And I'm listening, all the testimony that we're getting and the reaction of you guys, and trying to come up with some proposed things we could change a little here, a little there, without it being totally radical surgery, et cetera. Okay. Meanwhile, on the issue of location, tier 1A, 1B, and tier 2, key issue. There we're getting we probably will get language from the Environment Committee. They heard it all day. They talked about it yesterday. It didn't get to a resolution, shall we say. There was a lot of differences of opinion, et cetera. Unfortunately, in my opinion, they didn't start with the kind of presentation of this that we did. They didn't hear, the whole explanation that we did from Representative Marcotte and Representative Brandy. But anyway, we may get that. I am taking the liberty, I will tell you, of knowing that they're worried about tier 2, but knowing that there's a lot of people who want something flexibility with tier 2, and seeing if we can come up with some compromise language. And if they send us something, we'll take that into account. And all of that has to come together. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow morning, but by tomorrow morning, some point tomorrow, remember what we need to do is we need to give whatever input we need to give to our council, which will consist of both Ellen Zakowski and Cameron Wood. We will give them input so they can go away, not very long, and give us the final so that by the end of the day, we can vote it out. if that, or voted down, if that's what people want to do. But that's that, I just wanted to sort of walk you through what's happening. I think obviously, you know what the issues are that are out there. Many of the changes I feel, and I suspect you feel, are good. You know, they did a good job in here. So anyway, that's where we are. And we've invited Mira Weinberger to testify because Let's Build Homes was really, in a lot of ways, the instigator of this particular version. This CHIPS version really comes from them. And so we didn't want to move it forward without hearing from, shall we say, the original authors, although of course it's changed, but. And so Miro, welcome and tell us for the record who you are and tell us what you think.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be with you as you re-engage this bill. I feel like it's kind of coming back to where this all started over in the pavilion. I think this is my 7th time testifying on this bill. I think the first time was with you. My name is Miro Weinberger. I'm the executive chair of Let's Build Homes. I also kind of bring to this discussion the experience of having been the mayor of Burlington for 12 years and having worked on housing throughout that period. Before that, I was an affordable housing developer for 15 years, built homes in Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, and Florida. And, you know, continuing to, since leaving office, kind of do a little bit of consulting advising on some projects and sort of understanding what's going on around the state. So bring all that to bear here. And I think I can share a screen. I have a presentation for you.
That's us. I like the mess there that started with.
Well, hopefully it's resolving itself here. How about this? Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. But you're not the Ways and Means Committee. That's where I was yesterday. I apologize for that. It is great to be back at House General. I did want to share with you quickly that Let's Build Homes is a different organization than when we talked to you in January. We have grown a lot since our launch in January. More than 200 organizations are now part of this coalition. They've formally signed on to a letter calling for action on housing. 745 individual Vermonters have as well, and these figures go up every week. We're proud of how broad of a coalition we've already become. That was the goal from the start, for this to be a truly statewide coalition and for it to represent really all the different sectors of Vermont that would benefit from more housing. And this coalition now includes everyone from AARP to the youth groups like the Spectrum Youth Services in Chittenden County. We have major employers like Beta and OnLogic and National Life and Jasper Hill Farms. And we also have the philanthropic community with the Vermont Community Foundation and United Ways from different parts of the state. Major institutions, you have the hospital sector very heavily represented because of the impact that housing is having on their workforce issues. You have utilities and Vermont State Colleges involved for similar reasons. So, you know, it is a large, robust coalition that wants action on housing. And I do think as the legislative session has evolved since we last saw you, in many ways, this coalition is viewing the CHIP bill as the most significant housing action before the legislature this session, and it is a high priority for us for this to move. I will just say quickly, we care about other things. It's not the only. You're certainly going to be hearing from us on other housing issues. We have been weighing in on the continued investment public investment in affordable housing. We've been sending letters to the money committees about that. We strongly support continued permanent affordability investment. And I want to stress that, especially as I know you're grappling with affordability issues. We believe that is an essential role for government to play, and our coalition supports that. We think things need to be done on appeals reform and Act 250 as well. We are gearing up major efforts there. But what we are our highest priority right now is the infrastructure bill. We come from, here's our basic belief. I think there's a lot of agreement. I won't belabor this. We think the cost of housing is just way too high in Vermont. We think almost everyone agrees with that. Under our analysis of why the cost of housing is so high is that we have really made it too hard to build, and we have stopped building at the rates that we have historically in Vermont. And that has meant that we have housing scarcity now, and there is increased competition for the housing that is there, and it is that is driving up the cost of housing, that increased competition. When I say we aren't building at the rates we were, let me show you graphically quickly a couple ways we see this here. This is a VHFA slide from their housing needs assessment last summer. Back in the 1980s was a big decade for housing. We were building almost 2% new units, new homes, new permanent homes every year. That started to drop off in the 90s. And then around the turn of the century, it really dropped off dramatically. And we're back building at about now a third of the rate that we have historically. Another way to view it is from this slide from the Vermont Futures Project, Kevin Chu. I really find this interesting. At the same time, we stopped building around 2000 and the rates we had in the past. You also see a leveling off of population. And, I think 25 years is a substantial period of time. I think that has in some ways become the norm. We think of Vermont as not really growing. That wasn't the norm. If you go back to this post-war period, we were steadily growing. And when that changed, there are some really troubling demographic issues that I think you're building, the whole building is grappling with every year. It really changes when we stop growing as well. So if you look there on the left in the year 2000, that was sort of the age distribution. 23 years later, when we've stopped building, we stopped growing, and the most dramatic changes, we have a much older population than we did before, school-age kids, as well as the working population going down. We think, I don't think this is always understood as being a function of the fact that we stopped building, but I think there's clearly a relationship, as these graphs, I think, point out. So to get back on track, to rebound to where, that historic trajectory, this is basically what VHFA says we need to do. We need to go from building around 3,000 homes a year as a state. We've had a little bit more in some recent years, to something more like, at least nearly 5,000. And if you go for the higher end of the range, you're up at, more than 7,000 and growing a year. How are we going to do that? One of the critics of the bill, really the only critic of the bill that I've heard, and maybe you are hearing from him as well, the auditor has suggested that the way to do that is to increase the funding that we have going into our outstanding housing nonprofits. He's right. We have outstanding housing nonprofits. They do great things. And again, we support funding them and pushing ourselves to fund them. When I was the mayor of Burlington, we increased our Affordable Housing Trust Fund something like 5x. The issue, though, is our current system, or at least our pre-pandemic system before the massive amounts of federal money, generated about 250 permanently affordable homes a year using that system with those subsidies. Maybe we can push that up a little bit, but when we're talking about a need of adding 2,000 or 3,000 homes a year, I think it really calls into question the viability of doing it in that matter. The other route is to is to undo, is to unleash the market to get these homes built. And that is what CHIP, we believe, plays a significant role in doing. It's not gonna, we may still have trouble getting market homes built in this period, as we talked about before. There are a lot of headwinds now that we finally have this consensus of sorts for housing. We are also facing high interest rates, high construction costs. Now we have this tariff environment. But one of those high construction cost issues, certainly on some projects, not all projects, but on some projects, is there is a high cost of public infrastructure. And even though this has traditionally been the public sector's responsibility to build this kind of infrastructure, that is not the way Vermont has been working in recent decades. We have put that cost largely on projects, and it can be, a big additional hurdle. CHIP addresses that. And that we're very grateful that you guys put some early energy behind it, and that it has gotten to the point where it's on the cusp of passage. Maybe I should pause there. Yesterday when I was at Ways and Means, we got into the whole debate over foregone revenue. I'm happy to speak to that if that would be helpful. I know you're having some discussion about an affordability test that Let's Build Homes definitely has some strong views on that. I'd look to you, Chair Mahali. Where would it be helpful for Let's Build Homes to weigh in from here?
Well, one of the things we've heard a lot, I'm not sure I can speak for the committee on this, so please interrupt me, members, if you disagree. I think the but-for issue, I think everybody here knows that by and large in Vermont, under our current conditions, that's not a major problem. It's not a major problem that the development would just pop up somewhere else without the subsidy. So I don't think we need the but, I think Ways and Means was for that. It's less of a problem here. One of the things and we've had a good bit of testimony on the affordable housing, et cetera. One thing I'm curious about, I think you could really add, we did not have Doug Hoffert testify here. The state auditor. Doug has been critical over the years, really a major critic of assessment of tax increment financing. He wrote me and said, could he testify? And since it was about TIF, CHIPS, and CHIPS was over there, I said, you should testify to Commerce, and he did. So consequently, he never testified. I've read his report, and I had significant issues with his report, but I'm just wondering if you could summarize your thoughts in a way, if you're willing, if you could take a minute and say, sort of like, here were the criticisms, here are your thoughts. Is that something?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. We have been on a little bit of a parallel testifying circuit, so I have heard him speak on this a number of times, and I've seen what he's written. The big differences of opinion that jump out to me, there are some areas of agreement, but we don't seem to agree from comments he has made publicly. He sort of has an opinion about the housing situation, and he has been quoted by 7 Days sort of questioning whether those projections I just showed you were inflated. And he has sort of questioned I think his quote was, I don't see why we need to do more housing. We just fundamentally disagree with that for everything, all the reasons I've said up until now. Our lack of building housing is driving our homelessness problem. It's driving the fact that we have, half of our renters are rent burdened, and a quarter spend over 50% on rent. And this issue is rippling through all these other sectors. We have this report that comes out from the Green Mountain Care Board last summer that says the way to fix the crises in healthcare that we're having is to build more homes. So there's a fundamental disagreement, which I think is important to state, because I think some of our difference of opinion on how important this program is flow from that fundamental difference of opinion on what's going on out there. He has critiqued the fact, he's made a lot of the fact that debt is expensive, and suggested that tax increment financing is not a efficient way to pay for infrastructure. It is true that if you are going to use debt, that you do spend some of your money on interest costs. We've been very fortunate to generally be living in a low interest rate environment. I think my read of the numbers is the amount of interest costs and costs in general that TIF debt incurs is very comparable to what mortgage debt incurs. So, and I think we all, those of us who have mortgages know there are big advantages to using mortgage financing. Namely, you don't have to come up with all the money up front. You're able to act and do things now using so you're definitely getting a real value for borrowing. And so I disagree with that idea that we shouldn't fund. I think with infrastructure in particular, when you're building an asset that is going to have value for, well more than the length of the time, these 20 or 30-year financing, it actually seems like a matter of unfairness to me to put all the costs for a public asset that is going to benefit the public for decades and decades to come, to put that all on current taxpayers to pay for now. I think that's a mistake.
That was one of the things that puzzled me. What was his alternative?
He has suggested that, that it would be simpler to just make this into a grant program. But, it's hard for me to see a really, and there was some discussion at Ways and Means yesterday. There's talk of using a substantial amount of money in this session to buy down property tax rates. You could use that money instead to fund infrastructure. The thing about that, though, is you would have to make that decision. That would make a big difference if you were going to spend $120 million on infrastructure this year. But, you would have to be making decisions like that as a legislature every year for us to really, in a systematic way.
In other words, if you issue a bond, you have to have a source of pay. If you don't issue a bond, then you're using current income taxes to pay for it, right?
I mean, I think there's a real elegance to tax increment financing and CHIP financing in that it is a way to pay for very expensive items. This is significant. I mean, I think over time, this will lead to tens of millions, over enough time, if this really becomes the way we operate from here, this will, there'll be hundreds of millions of dollars that get invested in the decades to come in infrastructure. And it gets done without without the legislature having to write a check every year. It gets done without local governments having to write a check. It really gets done without any direct impact on existing taxpayers. The projects pay for themselves, but they do it, out of these newly created public funds. And I think it is there's a lot about that I think is politically workable. It kind of, you size how much infrastructure is worth investing in based to some degree on how much value or how many homes are being created, how much new revenue is being created. So you're not making some arbitrary grant decision to give $1 million here and $1.5 million over here. It's sort of scaled by the size of the new revenues being created. So I think there's elegance to that. And I think, the fact that you can look your constituents in the face and say, it is the project that is paying for this. The developers are still paying their full property taxes. And for a period of time, most of those taxes are being used to pay for this infrastructure. But after that, we all benefit from this new revenue. That, I've taken that kind of question to voters many times in Burlington because we have had tax increment financing, and the voters, generally 60-70% of the people think that's that makes sense. And we always had very high, even when there was some controversy over the project, we usually had people very comfortable with this form of financing. So I think it works.
Is there one of the other criticisms that Doug raised which I think is sort of in the building and the atmosphere, is questioning whether there weren't, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say corruption, although some people feel that, but misuse and misappropriation of funds, taking more out of the ed fund than we should have.
Yeah,
And then he, as an auditor, had to do repeated audits and found problems all the time. I'm wondering whether your CHIPS design addressed that issue.
yeah, no, I appreciate the chance to speak to that. I mean, first of all, yes, all these TIF projects get audited. I am not familiar with them finding ever any indication of corruption, of you know, misappropriation, you know, some kind of, I've never seen corruption be an issue in any of these TIF districts. Certainly, there has been some challenge with the administration of some of these TIF districts. And he has a point there. The TIF districts are there is some real administrative complication to administering a district that has dozens, or I think in Burlington's case, maybe hundreds of properties that are within the district. You get into some very complicated issues about the boundaries of the district, and sometimes, you know, you've had situations where you get screwed up over whether it's part of a property in or outside the district. There, you know, someone makes an administrative error with a particular parcel 1 year, and then that ripples through the next 10 years. So, you know, there's a lot that can go wrong and has gone wrong. And, you know, his audits have found some mistakes. I think they've always been sort of honest mistakes, but they've found some mistakes that get corrected after the audits. The CHIP is much more straightforward than that. You are looking at, generally speaking, one property or certainly one project. It's very clear what the base level taxation is, and it's very clear what the new increment is. And it just gets rid of a lot of that administrative complication. It also it also addresses one of, I think, the legitimate criticisms of that I think lead to people feeling like TIF districts take money away that would otherwise be headed to the ed fund, because in these districts, you do capture background growth. If, you know, somebody somewhere in the district decides to make an investment that may really have very little, if anything, to do with the public investment being made, that increment goes into the district and instead of the ed fund. So there, in a real sense, there is some foregone revenues or diversion of revenues. With that, there just isn't that issue when you're focused on one parcel or on one project. That background growth is just off the table. I guess the last thing I want to say, which is maybe the most important thing, is this, I think, has been misunderstood often, the way the program gets talked about in the building. The JFO, and here I'll reshare my screen on this because I did develop some slides here. The JFO does put out these reports, I think, every year or every other year. They always say two things. They always say, look, actually analyze it. They always say this top point here. We don't know if TIF is actually adding to the ed fund or detracting from the ed fund, because we don't know whether these projects would have been built or not without the TIF investment. They then go on to say, put a number on it, and I think the current number, their most recent report last month said, I think that over the next 5 years, the ed fund will lose somewhere between $4.5 and $8 million every year. If you read that, though, the assumption behind that is if all of this development would have happened anyways, then that would have been the impact. So they're essentially giving you the number that they put on it in these JFO reports is a worst case scenario number that they're clear about. But I think there's a lot of anchoring around that number because it's something tangible in the report. I think for CHIP, even more so, they have said, and I think it's true, that they do not know. No one really can say with real confidence, is this going to lead to short-term negative impacts on the ed fund, or is it actually going to increase revenues in the short term on the ed fund? It all depends on whether the project would have happened or not. without the investment. Well, what do we know about housing projects? We know they're not happening often enough. We know they're not happening at the rate they were as recently as the 80s. The whole idea with this project, with this concept, is to try to do something that will make it more likely for projects that aren't happening now to happen. And if on balance it succeeds with that, then this really may not be draining in any sense money from the ed fund at all. This could result in new revenues right from the start. You're going to get annual reports that can be evaluated, that give you a sense of how this is working. At a time when we are facing the pressures we are, we think that's the way to go. Try this, see if it works, evaluate it. And we may find that this whole idea that the ed fund is negatively impacted is just wrong. I could keep going with this, but let me pause there.
Yeah, let me ask you, I'm personally, I agree that I think the JFO is making what I call the zero error. That is, the zero error is, a lot of economists have trouble with this. If they don't understand, they don't have data to show where between 0 and whatever 100 something is, they've picked 0. They say, I don't know, so I'm not going to include it, which means that they've picked the least likely number.
Yeah.
But is the existing TIF language that's not this, okay, but the existing TIF, does it have a but-for test in it that BEPC has to administer?
It does, and I will say one thing that I think I basically kind of agree with the auditor on it. It is very difficult to administer that test. It is very hard to definitively say whether it's bad. So
right.
I think it's a test that a lot of energy goes into debating, and I think it's a waste of time and effort, and no one can really definitively say.
I'm asking because I've been asked, why doesn't this have a but for in it? After I make the argument that you just made, that in Vermont at this time in our history, it's most likely that things wouldn't happen without additional. Yeah. But then people say, well, if it's harmless, why not put it in? Is BEPC often found, or with any frequency found, that a project failed the but-for test and stopped a program?
I don't know the answer to that. I assume that BEPC has rejected some rationale. Certainly, I know that if you are putting together a TIF application, there's a lot of effort and concern that goes into trying to make a serious but-for argument. I guess this would be true for TIF as well, but I want to make it with CHIP. Another reason not to go through this exercise, which is, very unsatisfying exercise of trying to prove whether or not an investment is needed, is what is the money? A real justification. Why don't we need a but-for test here? I think but-for tests can be appropriate where you really want to make sure you're not, overspending in an area. You really want to make sure you're only paying for exactly, that there's a real reason to be concerned about money going in this direction if you don't get that balancing right. I don't think that's the case with CHIP, in that where is the money going? This foregone revenue, it's still money that is going into essential public assets. This is money being invested in streets, sidewalks, utilities. These are in general, and there is some, there's some ambiguity on the way in which the infrastructure definition is being written. It may not be 100% publicly owned, but basically this is going into essential public infrastructure. And that we should, I think, these are costs the public has traditionally been responsible for. These are public assets that are going to be owned by municipalities for, again, decades to come. That ownership of these new assets is going to create public benefits for the city and the state for a long time to come. It is appropriate for public money to be going into these assets. So that's one point. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I think that's yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I lost where I was going. I think there are a couple other points here about I guess the last thing I do want to make sure we get to, cut me off here if you don't want to get in this now, but the other kind of fundamental problem with the JFO analysis is that, it really is just trying to make an evaluation about short-term ed fund impacts. And there's so much that is left out of that calculation. The long-term revenues are not really evaluated. And income and sales tax revenues, which are, also flow from new houses getting built, and could easily, if you think about a two-person household, as I understand the numbers, generates about $1,600 annually in new income taxes. New sales taxes. New income taxes can easily be, for like a median household, right around $3,000 a year. You add those two things together, and that could exceed the value of foregone property tax revenues. And and then finally, there's no attempt to evaluate the other public benefits, whether reduced homelessness, reduced instability, the benefits to the economy of a better workforce situation, people being able to recruit and retain employees better. Those are massive public and economic benefits that are just not evaluated the way we analyze TIF districts.
I'm wondering, when I look at this draft, the legislative body has to submit a report, and the report has to include a pro forma of the project, all its expenses, et cetera, income projections, and a projection of the tax increment. So I'm presuming they have to make an affirmative showing that they need the tax increment for the project. Right? In other words, it's part of the application process. You have to show that the tax increment is where it fits in the financing of the overall project. And I'm just wondering if that isn't really the replacement for the but-for test, because VEPSI would have to be convinced that you need the tax increment.
The VEPSI will be doing a financial feasibility assessment. I think that's accurate. That will be part of their evaluation of these proposals that come from the municipalities and the city. I'm probably not the one to speak to the distinction, whether there's a distinction between that. As they do that, if you don't have a but-for test in there, I don't think they will be, may change the way that they do that evaluation or what they demand in that evaluation. But, maybe VEPSI would be better positioned to speak to that.
Does any member of the committee have additional questions of Mr. Wine?
I don't think I do.
I have a question.
Shoot.
How many projects, what impact do you actually see for this measure? If adopted the way that it's written, or if we took the guardrails, that DHFA has recommended, why is this the singular most crucial issue that your, consortium has pushed?
I believe there are many projects that will benefit from that. I mean, we have polled our membership on this. We've asked people to, if they are currently working on a project that would benefit from CHIP, let us know. And we got significant response from that. I have heard great interest from multiple municipalities in the real enthusiasm. And I think, I don't know if you're having the league testify again, but they report that their membership is excited about this in a way that, few issues get municipalities excited because they have specific projects that they now see a path forward on. I know I'm actually speaking to you from Fairleigh. We have a board member on Let's Build Homes, Jonah Richard, who has been explicit. He has several projects. And I think the last time I presented to you, I showed you how one of his projects could benefit from this. So I will say, as Mayor of Burlington, which has maybe the best infrastructure, public infrastructure in the state, as an older community that has been building it for a couple hundred years. Even in Burlington, almost every time a significant project came forward that was going to create a significant number of new homes, there was some kind of infrastructure upgrade, expensive infrastructure upgrade that was necessary. We saw that with City Place. We're seeing it with Cambrian Rise, this large development. And that's even where we have this really robust network, this grid of public infrastructure. I think a lot of Vermont is not in that situation, and if we really want to see the Act 181 changes and Home Act changes that you've passed in the last couple of years result in new homes, I think many projects that would try to act on those projects will benefit from this. I can't put a number on it for you exactly what it's going to be. I think that is, a reason there's a sunset in the bill, a reason that there is a requirement for annual reporting. But my gut feeling in looking at the reaction of people working on these issues around the state, this is going to be a big deal.
Elizabeth.
Do you see any hazards in implementing a program like this in the very same session, in the very same year that we are undergoing huge revisions to our education funding formula?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't see hazards from the perspective that this is going to have a big negative impact on the ed fund that you're taking action to stabilize and to address. Again, because there's no clarity that this may actually help. As we've just been discussing, if this does result in a bunch of new projects, it's actually going to help with additional funds flowing there. Certainly, if there are big changes to the way property taxes are assessed, if the amount of property taxes were to be dropped dramatically and be replaced by more of an income tax, I actually haven't followed all the blow by blow of the ed reforms that you're contemplating. I mean, certainly if there are changes to the amount of property taxes being paid will impact this program. I think that will be something that builders and municipalities are looking at as they contemplate these infrastructure agreements and bring them to VEPC. As long as there's sort of predictability and stability in how those changes are implemented, it may impact how much is available for this kind of infrastructure spending, but it should still be a workable tool unless you're contemplating some kind of fundamental change that I haven't heard kind of being on the table.
But I guess that's what I'm asking is, it surprises me that you as the head of this organization, that you haven't been following the proposed changes, because we don't know what the outcome would be. And I guess what I'm asking is not is whether now, while that is being while that is being worked out over this biennium, whether this program, whether it's risky for this program in terms of the pool of money that you have to work with, whether it's risky for this program to start right now, not 2 years from now, but right now, while that's all being negotiated.
Yeah, no, I take your point, and I probably do, personally need to do a better job of understanding, what's on the table. If it would be shocking to me if we moved to a system that Vermont was not continuing to rely significantly on property taxes in one way or another. It's such a stable, important source of revenue for municipalities outside of the ed fund issue. I think this is going to remain a valuable tool. If there's something about the way you pass the legislation that leaves considerable uncertainty, if there's like a phase-in period, it's possible it could slow down the use of this. I mean, certainly, everyone involved in this is going to be looking very carefully before taking on debt. It gets a very close evaluation as to, what kind of financial impact is this going to have? And so if there is some uncertainty there, it could slow down the use of the tool. I think that's a fair point, but I tend to believe there's still going to be very substantial property taxes paid by new developments in the state. And
I'm not, that's not really my question. My question isn't whether there's value to the program. Whether there is or not, that's not my question. My question is whether this is right now, while they're working all of that out, whether this is the best time to push into something like this.
Yeah. I mean, if you pass it this year, the process of coming forward, is something that takes place. I don't see that as a significant reason not to act on this now. We have a housing crisis now. And this is a tool that we can move forward. I think it'd be enormously, I think, unfortunate if there was no, I think we need to be taking significant housing actions every year, given where we're at. And this is, there might be a little, it may mean that people trying to use this have to do some additional work to understand the new system. That work will happen. And it would be a shame, I think, to lose another year or more when we're on the cusp of taking this action now.
I agree with that, but I also, the housing and education and healthcare all have to go hand in hand. And I wonder whether, and I've brought this up, I think, with you before, as also with Mr. Shu, that what the other piece of the education reform program being so much in flux about what, how big districts are going to be. I think it's short-sighted to not take those things into account while we are developing both of these programs. And I just wonder what your organization thinks about where the education reform is headed versus how we are going to develop housing at the very same time.
I think in part from your prior questions, she's referring to, well, I'm not going to put words in her mouth. The issue has been raised about closing school, do we build houses in the wrong place? And we close the school, et cetera.
Like, why wouldn't we take both of those things together and have a coordinated a coordinated plan with both of those? They're both investments. And when we don't, in a time when we don't have money and we have to be careful about our investments, why wouldn't we coordinate both of those planning periods or projects?
Thank you. Does anyone have, Gail, did you have a question?
We're gonna break at 10:30.
Yeah, 10:30.
It's not a question, it was a comment, so it can wait.
I'll tell you what, thank you so much, Mira. I'm glad you came.
Could
Yeah,
I just, I did just want to address the affordability test that, as I understand, you're considering. The an earlier version of the bill. So I understand there's been testimony from some of the housing nonprofits that that CHIP, there's concern that CHIP does not do enough to support those type of projects. And there was an attempt to address that with an earlier version of the bill where a larger percentage of projects that had permanently affordable units in, they could take a larger percentage of the increment. You know, if 70 is what's going for a normal CHIP project, maybe 80% or more could go for a project that had permanently affordable units in it. And Let's Build Homes certainly supports that. The idea of putting something like the priority housing proposal test that would require 20% of the units to meet some kind of affordability test does give us real concern. And I know you've just had testimony from Maura Collins on it, and I won't repeat that. I will just say this, I think in this committee in particular, there's been support for this concept and an understanding that that one part of the housing challenge right now is the high cost of public infrastructure, and this is a bill that does something about that. If you add to that, if we make, as we often do when writing legislation, try to solve other issues and try to also make this a tool that meets affordability goals, there just should be a real awareness that will have an impact on the same project financials that you're trying to improve by having the public responsible for the public infrastructure. There will be a cost to meeting that affordability test there will be an impact on the financials, and it could be substantial. By my rough analyses, and if there was interested in looking this further, we could submit something in writing, but if you lower rents to 80%, by regulation, by agreement, you could easily be taking the value that a bank will recognize for those units away of $100,000. I think it's really not. The numbers I've looked at, easily it could be $80,000 to $100,000 impact by adding for every unit that you require there. So if you're looking at a 50 unit development somewhere and you require 10 of those units to be 80% of median, that could be a new $1 million hurdle impact on the pro forma. And particularly given the challenge of the time we are facing, I have real concern that at the same time you're helping address one important cost, you're creating another one, and I would advise caution there.
thank you. Yes,
Do we have that slide that he put up before?
could you make sure that you submit to us your slide deck, Mira?
Yes, I will do that right away.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Don't have a
Thank you.
slide on this issue. If you want something written on this, we can provide it.
Well, we may, but we may not need it. We'll see.
All right.
Thanks so much, Mira.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you having us in and hearing us out, and the leadership you've shown on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what we're gonna do, members of the committee, is we're gonna break now. And I will use the A word in a moment, and we will return at 11 o'clock. This will allow you all to relax a little, do whatever you need to do. We're thinking about possible options to discuss in light of the testimony that we've had. So we'll have discussion at around 11 o'clock, okay? And we are gonna have, in the afternoon, we're gonna have some testimony. I asked Sean Gilpin to come in just because I wanted to ask Sean simply a simple question, which is, do you remember he administers VHIP? And VHIP it's private and it has rent limitations. I just wanted to know how they do it. That's all. Okay, so see